Hey guys, today I want to make a prediction for the 2024 presidential election between President Joe Biden and former President Donald Trump. And even over a year after the swearing in of Joe Biden in the 2020 presidential election, Joe Biden and Donald Trump remain the frontrunners for their respective parties' nominations in the next presidential election in 2024. As you can see here, for the Democratic primary, the incumbent president, of course, is at the very top. However, he is very unpopular, which we'll take a look at in just a few moments here, but he is also very old, which is why his odds are a lot lower than what you would typically see for an incumbent president. Kamala Harris, the very unpopular vice president, only has a less than 1 in 5 chance of winning the nomination, while Pete Buttigieg and Hillary Clinton come in third and fourth. So really, the Democratic electorate does not have too many great choices. It's either Joe Biden or somebody that is very unpopular, somebody who is too young and unexperienced, or somebody that the entire country basically hates. So right now, the Democratic primary, I think, is very, very weak for 2024. And if Joe Biden is not the nominee, I think the Democratic Party will struggle in that election, because right now, out of everybody on this list, Joe Biden is undisputedly the best candidate in terms of winning in a general election. And if you look at his popularity, it is not good at all right now. He has a 41% approval rating. That is lower than Donald Trump's favorability rating right now. Donald Trump right now has a 42% favorability rating. Of course, he is more unfavorably viewed than Joe Biden, who has a 53% disapproval rating to Trump's 53.9% unfavorable rating. But still, it is, really crazy how Joe Biden now is less popular than Donald Trump. Of course, if they were to go head to head, things are a little bit different, which we'll also look at in just a few moments. But for the Republican primary of 2024, you will see, of course, that Donald Trump is undisputedly the front runner, with Ron DeSantis in a pretty close second, and then you have a lot of candidates with very low odds of actually winning this nomination, and you'll see the GOP odds have remained relatively consistent basically throughout the last year, as have the odds for the 2024 Democratic nomination. So really not too much has changed in terms of, who the candidates will be in 2024. So it looks like, as of right now, it will be another rematch between Joe Biden and Donald Trump, and the third time that Donald Trump will be running in a presidential election. So to start this off, I'm going to be filling in the solid states for both parties. So Joe Biden, of course, going to win most of the West Coast. These are states in which I think Joe Biden will win by over 15%, and these are all states that Joe Biden won by over 15%, by, a lot more than 15% in many of these states in 2020. So this gives Joe Biden now 159 electoral votes, and for Donald Trump, we have a lot of very solid states for him as well. All these rural states in the middle of the country, as well as all of Nebraska, with the exception of the 2nd District. He will also win Kansas and Missouri, both by solid margins. In 2016, he won Missouri by a likely margin. Not likely, but he won Kansas by a likely margin in 2020. 2016, they were basically all solid for the former president. He will also win, of course, all these deep southern states by big margins against Joe Biden, like he did in 2020. If you look at states like Alabama, Trump plus 25.5, Mississippi 16.5, that is typically the weakest state for the GOP in the South. Louisiana, Trump won by 18%, Arkansas by almost 30%, Tennessee by 20%. So Donald Trump had very strong victories across the southern United States, as Republicans typically do. And so these are all of the solid states that I will be giving to Donald Trump and Joe Biden. So 102 electoral votes for Donald Trump and 159 for Joe Biden. Now, before we continue, make sure you join my Discord server if you have not, to be updated on the 2022 Senate elections, as well as the other races in the 2022 midterms. The link is at the very top of the description below. So before I move on to classifying the likely lean and tilt states, I do want to take a look at the head-to-head polling between Joe Biden and Donald Trump. You'll see that for the Democratic primary, at least, Joe Biden is still the frontrunner. In terms of polls without Joe Biden, it seems to be Kamala Harris. And then for the Republican primary, Donald Trump, of course, is the frontrunner for his party. And then if you were to look at the polls without Donald Trump, Ron DeSantis, sometimes Mike Pence leads in the polls without Donald Trump for the 2024 Republican nomination. And so looking at general election polling between Joe Biden and Donald Trump, this is the RCP average, Trump plus 5.4. This does not reflect what is shown here. These are just the polls that Wikipedia has put up, and this 5.4 margin are the are using the polls that Real Clear Politics has selected. So if you do look at the latest polls between Joe Biden and Donald Trump, you will see that Joe Biden does lead over Donald Trump in a majority of the latest polls that have been released. At least the polls that have been released this year, Joe Biden does lead in all but 3 of them. Now, looking back, you will see that earlier we go, the more Joe Biden leads by. If you look at polls released at the very beginning of his term, he leads by much larger margins than he does right now, and he actually led in all of them until August of 2021. That really is when he started becoming more and more unpopular, and recently his numbers have rebounded a little bit as he does lead by slight margins over Donald Trump. But of course, there is a huge amount of the electorate that is undecided currently, less so at the beginning of his term. So Joe Biden and Donald Trump obviously are not candidates that are very popular at all nationwide. They may be popular among their own party, which is why they are able to win their party's nominations. But as a whole, across the country, you will see that there's a huge chunk of voters that still do not know who they plan on voting for if Biden and Trump are again the nominees in 2024. And if you look at other head-to-head polling, Joe Biden does do pretty well against Ron DeSantis, leading in every single poll that has been released. Less so for Kamala Harris. You'll see Kamala Harris, loses to Trump by some pretty big margins sometimes in basically every single poll released between the two. And so, that really does show how unviable of a candidate Kamala Harris is. She may have made history by becoming the first female vice president, the first Asian American vice president, the first African American vice president, but still, she is unbelievably unpopular and a lot more unpopular than Joe Biden. So, to fill in now the likely states for both Joe Biden and Donald Trump, I'm going to start off with the likely states for Biden. The state of Oregon, 8 electoral votes. This state just was not that solid for him in 2020. He only won it by 16%. Same thing in New Jersey, so that's why these 2 states I've put into the likely category. So by likely, I mean states in which these 2 candidates are going to win by 5 to 15%. On the likely states for Joe Biden, I also have Colorado and New Mexico, giving him another 15 electoral votes. He actually won Colorado by 13.5% in 2020, which was a pretty big margin, considering that Hillary Clinton won it by less than 10%. And for New Mexico, he won it by around 10%. So Joe Biden did fairly well here in Colorado and New Mexico in the previous election, but I don't think his margin is going to go up too much next year, or not next year, but in 2024, and I don't think that he's going to be able to win Colorado with a solid margin. I will also be giving Biden the at-large vote in Maine. Typically, Democrats do pretty well there, and as well as that, I will be giving him the state of Virginia, 13 electoral votes as another likely state for the incumbent president. This was a state, of course, where Hillary Clinton only won it by 5.3% in 2016. So that was obviously a very disappointing win for the 2016 Democratic nominee, considering that her vice presidential candidate Tim Kaine was a senator and former governor of the state. But Joe Biden won the state in 2020 by 10%. And so the state of Virginia, even though Glenn Youngkin did win the governorship here last November, that does not mean that this state is a Republican state. This state is still by far a lot more Democratic than it is Republican. The 2021 election came at a very bad time for the Democratic Party, and 2022 probably won't be too much different, but it did come at a time in which the Democratic Party was very unpopular, and they also fielded a pretty bad candidate in Terry McAuliffe. So this gives Biden now 211 electoral votes, and the final likely state I have on this map for Joe Biden is the state of Minnesota. It's 10 electoral votes. I do think will remain, in the hands of the Democratic Party. This state was won by Biden by 7%, and I think the margin will be able to remain over 5% in the next election. Now, I will be filling in the likely states for Donald Trump, starting off with the state of Texas. This, of course, is a big one. Trump won the state by 5.6% in 2020, a very, very weak margin for a Republican nominee. In 2008, McCain won it by 11%. 2016, Romney won it by 16%. If you go back to 2016, even Trump won it by 9%. But this 5% margin for the Republican Party really just goes to show you how Texas is still shifting more and more to the left, with its, large urban populations being very Democratic and growing, very much over the last couple of years. And so this 5.6% margin is alarming for the Republican Party. This is probably the worst performance in the state of Texas, in a very long time, since 1996. Even Bob Dole won the state of Texas by a very similar margin to Trump's margin in the state in 2020, and Bob Dole only won 159 electoral votes. Texas was the largest state that Bob Dole, won. Obviously, because Texas is the second largest state, but this state made up a huge chunk of the total amount of electoral votes he even won. And so that really just goes to show you how bad of a margin Trump had in 2020 in the state of Texas. But in 2024, in a rematch, I think Trump's margin will remain over 5%. I don't think it will be improved by too much, and I don't think that it will get worse by too much, but I think that it will remain in the likely category. I will also be giving Trump the state of Indiana without Mike Pence on the ticket. It's very unlikely, by the way, that Trump chooses Mike Pence to run with him again. So I think that without Pence on the ticket, Indiana, a state that Trump only won by 16% in 2020, I think he will win by a likely margin. Iowa and Ohio, obviously, these two states will remain over 5%. In 2016, Trump flipped these states. So if you go back to 2012, Ohio and Iowa both voted for Barack Obama, but in 2016, you'll that Trump won both of these states by over 8%. So that was a massive shift. And in 2020, many Democrats were hoping that, the Rust Belt would shift back to the Democratic Party. Because if you look at 2008, the Democratic Party won every single state in the upper Midwest. And this really was what helped Barack Obama win the presidency. In 2012, they lost Indiana by a big margin. Obama only won the state by 1% in the previous election. But in 2016, the Democrats lost everything. They lost the blue wall that had been voting for them for almost 30 years consistently. Pennsylvania, Michigan, Wisconsin. These states had been voting for the Democratic Party since the election of Bill Clinton in 1992. The last time these states voted for a Republican was in 1998 for Pennsylvania and Michigan. And the last time that Wisconsin voted for a Republican before Donald Trump was in the landslide election of Ronald Reagan, his re-election in 1980. So, Donald Trump did very well in the upper Midwest. He won Ohio and Iowa by big margins. And in 2020, Democrats were looking to do very well in the upper Midwest in the blue wall. Of course, their margins were a lot lower than expected, but they thought they would at least be able to make the margins in Iowa and Ohio a little bit smaller. But Joe Biden basically made no gains. The margin in Iowa essentially stayed the same, or the margin in Ohio went down by 0.1%. Iowa went down by 1%. But that really is nothing. So these two states are very positively going to remain in the Republican column as likely states for Donald Trump, who has done very, very well in the Rust Belt, better than any Republican at this point. In the state of South Carolina, I have that as a likely state as well, and the state of Alaska, both states that Trump won by 10% in 2020, so really not too much to say here. These two states probably aren't going to shift too much, although the state of Alaska has been seeing its margins decrease for the GOP over time, as Democrats and independents are starting to do a little bit better in the state. So with the solid and likely states filled in here on this map, I have 221 electoral votes for Joe Biden and 188 for Donald Trump. And so now I'm going to be filling in the lean states on this map. So these are states in which either candidate will win by 1 to 5%. So these are states in which one candidate obviously has an edge over the other, but it could actually go either way in November of 2024. So I'm going to start off by giving the lean states to Joe Biden. Starting off with the state of New Hampshire, it's 4 electoral votes. It's a state that Biden won by 7% in 2020. In 2016, surprisingly, Hillary Clinton only won the state by 0.4%. The last time that New Hampshire voted for a Republican was in 2000 with the election of George W. Bush. So the state of New Hampshire has been relatively Democratic for a very long time now. 2008, Barack Obama won by 9%. In 2012, 5%. So Hillary Clinton's margin in 2016 was shockingly small, but in 2020, Joe Biden was able to bring this back up. I think he'll be able to hold on to it. I don't think he'll win it by over 5%, but I do think that he will be able to carry the state nonetheless and win it by, a margin larger than 1%, obviously. So this gives Joe Biden 225 electoral votes. I really only have one more lean state on this map for him, and that is the state of Michigan. Its 15 electoral votes were given to Biden by around 3% in 2020. I think that in the upper Rust Belt, this is of course the best state Joe Biden will perform in. It has historically been the more Democratic state out of the three. It has voted for Democrats by larger margins. If you go back to the 2008 election, Barack Obama won Michigan by 16.5%. So that really just goes to show you Michigan has been very Democratic at some points in history, in recent history, but the state is becoming increasingly competitive, and that is not good news for the Democratic Party, as they have relied on the Rust Belt to give them electoral wins for a very long time now. And so seeing this blue wall crumble is going to be a big issue for the Democratic Party, and they really need to make it up, and they are making up in many ways in the Sun Belt. As the Rust Belt becomes more and more Republican, you will see states like Georgia, Arizona, and Texas. Georgia and Arizona, two states Biden won in the previous election. These states are all shifting to the left, and this is of course with the exception of Florida, as the state continues to shift in the opposite direction. So this gives Joe Biden 240 electoral votes. Now I have quite a few lean states on this map for the former president, starting off with the big one being the state of Florida. This is a state that Trump won by 3% in 2020, 3.4%, a larger margin than his margin in 2016 of 1.2 over Hillary Clinton. So this state was a big win for the former president in the previous election. I will also be giving him Georgia and North Carolina, two states here on the eastern seaboard that have been voting Republican for a very long time. Although Georgia was flipped by 0.2% for Biden in 2020. Just looking at his popularity, you really cannot expect Joe Biden to win Georgia again. That simply is just not going to happen. So this will give Trump now 250 electoral votes. I will also be giving him the state of Pennsylvania, 10 electoral votes, putting him up at, not Pennsylvania, but Wisconsin, giving him 260 electoral votes. Again, this is a state that Biden won by less than 1% in 2020. It's very unlikely that he's going to win it again, considering that even Donald Trump now is more popular than the incumbent president. So, this is also to say that Trump actually won by a larger margin against Hillary Clinton in 2016 than Biden's margin against him in 2020. So 10 electoral votes for Donald Trump. I will also be giving Trump the 2nd District of Maine as likely. I forgot that earlier, but it will be likely. And Joe Biden, I will be giving him the 2nd District of Nebraska with a tilt margin. Now, these districts have not changed too much. Nebraska has been made a little bit harder for Democrats, but it has not been too drastic of a shift due to redistricting. So I will be giving Joe Biden finally his final state, the tilt state of Nevada. I think he'll win it by less than 1%. Democrats have been winning the state for a while now, since the early 2000s, but I do think that it will become more and more difficult for them as Republicans are getting more and more popular in the state and getting more and more competitive again. And for Donald Trump, I will be giving him both the states of Pennsylvania and Arizona. Again, just looking at Joe Biden's popularity and the head-to-head polling, Joe Biden led by 8% in November, when he won the popular vote only by around 3 to 4%. In 2024, the latest polls show Joe Biden barely leading over Donald Trump and losing to Trump in many of the latest polls that have been released. So this is my updated prediction for the 2024 presidential election between the incumbent president Joe Biden and former president Donald Trump. Donald Trump winning 291 electoral votes to Biden's 247. So thank you guys so much for watching this video. Make sure you like it down below if you enjoyed it. Comment down below who you think would win in a head-to-head scenario, of a rematch of the 2020 election in 2024. Subscribe to my channel if you have not, and I will see you guys in the next video.